Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:07. It's O'Connor and Company. Good morning. Thanks for joining us on a Wednesday. You know they call that Hump Day, Julie Gunlock.
They do.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right. I'm just checking. Thanks for tuning in here on a busy day as we continue to march our way forward. Can I love doing this because it sort of clarifies everything. 4 weeks from right now, we could very well be talking about who the next president of the United States will be.
Oh, wow.
Assuming it's not close. Of course, if it's close, we'll have to wait 8 weeks from now. Coming up at 6:35, Cal Thomas will join us. At 7:05, Stephen Gutowski, founder of The Reload. I want to talk about Kamala owning a Glock and whether that's even conceivable. 7:35, journalist Jerry Dunleavy, he's author of the book Kabul. It really focused on the pullout of Afghanistan. Want to get his perspective on the arrest of an Afghan man who was planning a terrorist attack here in America on Election Day. At 8:05, Joe Concha about Kamala's 60 Minutes interview and what CBS News seemed to do, editing it to make her look good. And then at 8:35, Richard Hunt from the Electronic Payments Coalition. We're trying to protect our credit cards. You got one of those credit cards that gets miles?
Yeah.
You know, airline miles or points? Yeah, it works, right? It's a great thing, great free market thing.
Yeah.
Use a credit card, you get points, you can use them to travel. That's good for the economy, makes the credit card companies out. So obviously the Senate wants to screw it up, and they're going to be doing that. So we want to talk it through with Richard Hunt from Electronic Payments Coalition. That's all coming up. Julie, how are you today? I worry about you on Wednesdays.
Why?
I don't know. It's the middle of the week. You know, everything's starting to cut. You start the week with such a naivete about how wonderful things are going to be and how you're going to. And by now, you've got to be so cynical and angry at the world.
You mean tired of you?
Sure. That's one way to put it. You're doing all right?
I'm doing great.
All right. We have another revelation about Doug Emhoff. And again, I just want to reiterate I was so wrong about this guy. And I want to express my deepest apologies to him because for the longest time, it sort of became a running joke here on the show that, number one, I would never remember his name.
Right.
What's Kamala's husband name?
Yeah, right.
It was a thing. We would do a bit.
Right.
And then when I thought of names, I would purposely pick names that sounded kind of
beige,
effeminate.
Oh, well, yes.
But sort of like
but right,
like Bruce or Lance,
Sebastian,
RuPaul, just it's sort of questioning his masculinity.
Yes.
But now, apparently, I mean, not only did he shtup the babysitter
right,
and knock her up and then make her pay hush money,
mm-hmm.
right, while he was married with 2 young children in the home, but now we've got these stories about him allegedly smacking his girlfriend on the sidewalk. By the way, Doug Emhoff has never sat in front of a camera and said that's not true.
Right.
And I have seen nobody come out that knows Doug Emhoff and say, well, that doesn't sound like the Doug Emhoff I know. He would never do anything like that.
Meanwhile, Justice Kavanaugh, 30 years before was accused of, some ridiculous thing. And Kamala acted like, he was
like it was the gospel according to
and he was
Christine
running
Blasey
rape
Ford.
camps.
Right.
I mean,
But that last point about Doug Emhoff, because usually the people who come out and vouch for your character are a big part of pushing back about stories like this. And not one person has come forward saying, I've known Doug Emhoff my entire professional career. I worked with Doug Emhoff. We were colleagues. And this is not the kind of guy that I knew and worked with. And here's why that's critically important, because yesterday's story from the Daily Mail and the same reporter in the same publication actually spoke with those very colleagues that he worked with. Went to those colleagues and said, you worked with Doug Emhoff, and now we've got all these stories about him. Does this wash with the kind of guy you knew and you worked with? And it turns out the people who worked with him thought he was awful and thought he was sexist and thought he was a misogynist.
Aggressive.
And horrible to the women he worked with.
Scary.
And would hire all these young, hot secretaries. And it was it's like a scene out of, Mad Men meets L.A. Law, basically, is what's going on here. Kamala's husband, Doug Emhoff, we know he got his nanny pregnant. This is Clay Travis's summation, by the way, everybody, Clay. Slapped a past girlfriend so hard he made her spin around and has been sued for being a misogynist at his law firm.
Wow.
And this is the guy the Democrats
and
have held up.
And this is just now coming out.
Just now coming up. But he's the guy who's redefining masculinity.
But Larry, look, in fairness, I'm sure the ladies of The View asked about this.
Right, exactly. They had the opportunity. The defenders of women there on The View, they had Kamala on the show yesterday, but I don't think it came up.
No, it didn't.
Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, faces explosive new allegations from his time at a top L.A. law firm. Attorneys who worked with Doug Emhoff at his former firm, Venable, say he yelled expletives, held a men-only cocktail hour in the office, revoked work perks from women who didn't flirt with him, and took only young, attractive associates in a limousine to a ball. 2019 lawsuit also claimed sex discrimination by other partners in the LA office Emhoff ran, and that while engaged to Harris, he hired an unqualified part-time model as a legal secretary because she was young, attractive, and friendly with the powerful men in the office. So, again, we're building a narrative here about who this guy is and what kind of reputation he has. And this latest story now adds credence to all the other stories that we've heard about him.
Yes, but according to leftist women, what we should really be concerned about is J.D. Vance calling some women cat ladies.
Right.
I mean, that's the real issue here, right, ladies? Not the fact that the potential first husband likes to beat women and treat them like crap and pass them over for office events and hire young ladies without qualifications because they're pretty. This seems to me a bigger threat to women.
Well, as you know from your work with Independent Women's Forum, an organization that represents women's interests that go well beyond just the one single issue we only ever hear about from women activists
between the waist
in
and
politics.
the knees.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is, if you're a Democrat and you are, the tip of the spear on defending a woman's ability to kill her baby while impregnated, that's all that matters. It is literally the only thing that matters.
You can be a monster, but
That's
if you
right.
further that position, absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I thought that had shifted in the Me Too movement with Harvey Weinstein. Listen, Harvey Weinstein was all in on women aborting their babies, and that seemed to be fine. So I thought maybe they had turned the page on this, if I may coin a phrase. I thought that women's groups had actually sort of moved on and matured a bit in looking at women as more than just, a person who needs to be able to kill their baby before giving birth, but apparently not. That Doug Emhoff is a champion because, well, he's doing two things, actually. He's, fully in favor of abortion. And secondly, he's getting out of the way and letting Kamala Harris shine in the spot, which I'm told by people like Jen Psaki is something so rare for men to do.
Yeah.
Which is so ridiculous.
It is so ridiculous.
It's so stupid.
It's almost as ridiculous as their marriage.
You're so supportive of your wife, and it's just such a new thing for us to see.
Right, exactly.
It's so insulting. But back to the article. One senior former staffer claimed Emhoff bragged about yelling, "Get the F out of my office," to a female partner at the firm, later telling his top male colleagues that he had put her in her place. What's worse was he bragged about it to the management at Venable, and they were aghast. Quote, "He's an a-hole. He told them how he put her in her place. A misogynist, that's who does that." A female ex-staffer said it was well known at the firm that Emhoff was, quote, "very flirty," and that if you weren't flirty back and didn't respond positively, then you were on his S list. This is Doug Emhoff. It's the latest story. Again, no pushback on this, no denials. And going back to the allegation that he physically assaulted a girlfriend, everyone says, well, they've denied that. No, they haven't. A staffer from the campaign put a written statement out saying only that the story is untrue, which, by the way, is a really open-ended denial. Because, if they got a date wrong, then technically the story is untrue. But if everything else is correct, right, this guy's a bad guy by every estimation. And the media doesn't seem to want to talk about it. It's 5:15, WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Interesting part of how people have talked about your role here is how your role has reshaped the perception of masculinity. And I'm not sure you planned on that, but you are an incredibly supportive spouse.
That's Jen Psaki just a week ago interviewing Doug Emhoff before the latest allegation. But it should be clear, that interview took place with Jen Psaki on MSNBC, which is a part of NBC News, Universal Comcast, proud as a peacock. That interview took place when everybody knew, and Doug Emhoff had conceded the point, that just 15 years ago, he had slept around with his kid's babysitter behind his wife's back, destroying his marriage, impregnating the girl, paying her $80,000 in hush money so that she would go away and the baby would go away. They knew that story at the time, and Jen Psaki was gushing about how he had redefined masculinity in America.
Yeah, this redefined masculinity in America and suggesting that Doug Emhoff is the first guy to help with the laundry is so insane. I mean, we had decades of Oprah, okay? And before that, we had Donahue, okay, who was, sort of this reimagined. Yeah. And, I remember my mom watching Donahue. I remember I had to suffer through some Donahue myself. But which was really cutting edge back then, right? And Donahue was definitely a feminist, and he would always declare he's a feminist, and he would have these guests on talking about men's roles. I mean, this is not new. This is not interesting. It's so ridiculous that they put him up there like he's the first man, like you said, like he's the first man to ever help with chores around the house.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
It's funny. I've started to think a lot about this. I've always been like this. My dad was like this, and to me, it's the right thing to do. Support women.
This whole idea,
so gross.
By the way, the only reason that they're trying to stress this whole thing is because they're trying to draw some distinction with Donald Trump because he's just such a beast of a man and he's this and he's that. But what's interesting about that is, first of all, Melania Trump is an incredibly impressive woman who he has supported, and she had a career on her own. But even beyond that, look at his daughter. He put his daughter in charge of part of his huge empire.
Well, and look at J.D. Vance's wife.
Yes.
I mean, these are not women that are not incredibly impressive in their own right.
Right. And by the way, if they decided to stay home and raise their family and raise their children, that's being a great husband too.
Exactly.
Why does masculinity have to be redefined in that, you've got a wife who has this huge career and hasn't had any children with you, you're a great husband. You know what? I feel like I'm a great husband, and I support my wife so she can do what she wishes to do, which is to be a mother for our children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's being a pretty good husband, that you work your butt off so that your wife can do that for your family.
Yeah, exactly.
It's despicable, but it's trying to change this. And it's also really all about politics. They're trying to create this facade of the Kamala Doug thing. They've only been married 10 years, by the way. They act like this is like this lifelong romance and sweet thing and all this stuff. It's like, look at the timeline. 15 years ago, he sleeps around on his wife and impregnates the babysitter. That blows up that marriage, pays the babysitter hush money. Everything goes away. 3 years later, he's at the Cannes Film Festival with his girlfriend, and it's reported by her to her friends that he smacked her on the sidewalk. And then 2 years later, he meets Kamala Harris, and they fall madly in love.
And meanwhile, he's been treating law associates terribly.
Right.
There's a record here. And again, think back to how Kamala Harris treated Judge Kavanaugh. Think of what she put that family through on some 30-year-old rumor that wasn't verified. And in fact, the witness couldn't remember the date, couldn't remember the details. There was no corroboration. Even her own family turned their backs on this supposed accuser. So Kamala Harris, it really is difficult for me to process this because it's just so disgusting. And the fact that the media is not insisting on an answer.
No, well, they're part of the story.
Well, of
the
course.
media is making this story. It's all a fraudulent fairy tale meant to get them to the election and appeal to suburban wives and suburban voters.
That's right.
There's a pop culture phrase, wife guy, which you've kind of been known as. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard about it.
As called a wife guy, a proud wife guy? How do you feel about that?
Well, if I do something annoying to Kamala and she gets upset, I'll just show her that article.
Right.
And I'll say, I'm trying.
Or a T-shirt or a mug.
Hey, by the way, this whole idea, we have to come up with a new catchy pop culture phrase. Let's call it wife guy. How about husband? Isn't that what a husband is? Isn't a husband a wife guy? It's so stupid. All right, so here's my quick exit question on this. Should Kamala Harris win the election, which I don't think she's going to, but should she win the election, will Doug Emhoff get more covers of Vogue than Melania Trump did?
Absolutely.
They will. They will put him on the cover
they absolutely
of Cosmo.
will. Yes.
They'll put her on the cover. Him on the cover of every woman's magazine will feature Doug Emhoff as the first gentleman.
Yeah. I mean, if Debbie Wasserman Schultz can get a cover, okay, he's getting a cover. Okay.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:36. It's O'Connor and Company, where sometimes we can be irreverent, but I hope you have some tolerance for that. Coming up at 6:05, we're going to talk to ABC 7's Brian Vandegraff, meteorologist, about the latest out of Hurricane Milton that's kind of taken a southerly turn in Florida. Now about to wreak havoc on a whole other part of the state. What's going on down there? 6:35, Cal Thomas will join us. 7:05, Stephen Gutowski, a firearms expert, editor of The Reload, talk about Kamala's Glock. She's just one pistol packing mama, that Kamala Harris. Mamala. 7:35, Jerry Dunleavy, author of Kabul, about this arrest of an Afghan man plotting a terrorist attack. We'll talk about that in a moment. 8:05, Joe Concha on Kamala's 60 Minutes interview. And then at 8:35, Richard Hunt with Electronic Payments Coalition. That's a lot. And we're going to get right to it. And when I say we, I mean me and she, Julie Gunlock. Julie.
Good morning.
You saw this story yesterday. Brett Baer reported it as it broke on Fox News. Take it away, Brett.
The FBI says it has foiled a terror plot set to take place inside the U.S. on Election Day. A criminal complaint just unsealed within the last 30 minutes says 27-year-old Nasser Tahedi conspired with ISIS and obtained firearms and ammunition to conduct that attack in the name of the terrorist organization, ISIS. The Justice Department says he took steps to move his family overseas and acquire machine guns and ammunition. FBI Director Chris Wray says tonight, quote, this defendant, motivated by ISIS, allegedly conspired to commit a violent attack on Election Day here in our homeland. Terrorism is still the FBI's #1 priority, and we will use every resource to protect the American people.
This is obviously a unnerving story because you have to think, listen, great, FBI got this guy, but this was specifically planned for Election Day. He was hoping to massacre as many people as possible at a polling place, apparently. I'm still getting details from the complaint, but one must wonder, are there other plots like that going on at the same in this nation, aimed for Election Day? And just on a pure safety basis and also a pure just election integrity basis, it's kind of another reason that if your state does have early voting, do that and not try to, show up just on Election Day if something, God forbid, should happen, number one. Number two, another important data point that is now being revealed. Yes, Tawahidi moved his family to America from Afghanistan, but when he did, it is critically important and relevant. It was September 9th, 2021, in the chaotic days after the Biden pullout, when you had Afghans who were hanging from airplanes at Kabul airport trying to get out. You'll remember not only did Biden, flat-footed and reacting to what was a disaster, send back our military to try to provide security around the airport that led to the horrible Abbey Gate massacre of 13 American troops, but they also sort of opened the floodgates and just filled up planes.
They let thousands in.
Thousands and thousands and thousands of
totally
Afghans
unvetted.
were unvetted and brought into this country just to clean up the mess. We don't want those scenes anymore, so just open the floodgates, and anyone in Afghanistan who wants to come in, come in. And apparently Mr. Tawahidi was one of them because he came in on September 9th.
And they wanted to sort of boost the number of people that were evacuated.
That's
they
right.
wanted that as, well, yes, it was kind of a quick, we got out of there quickly, but look at all these Afghanis, from a human rights perspective that we got out of the country. So they wanted to increase those numbers. So they just said, come on in, open those cargo bay doors. And literally there were pictures of Afghanis sitting on the floor of these cargo planes, just shoving them in and getting them out of there. And again, there was a political reason for that. It wasn't like, we want to get as many out as we could. They left Americans in Afghanistan, but they shoved these cargo planes filled with Afghanis.
It was 1,000% a political thing because you will remember as it was looking awful and the White House and the Biden administration had to cynically change the narrative about the horrors of the Afghan pullout and the disaster that it was. You're right. They wanted to get, all they cared about was volume, numbers, get as many people out of there as possible. Didn't matter if we vetted them or not. This was Jen Psaki reacting to it at the time.
Suspected ISIS ties.
Well, first I would say we have
now that there is a report that at least one of the Afghans evacuated to Qatar has suspected ISIS ties?
Well, first I would say we have a stringent vetting process which includes background checks before any individual comes to the United States.
Clearly,
so
that's a lie.
I can't speak to one individual, but I can tell you and confirm for you that we take the vetting of any individual who comes to the United States and comes out incredibly seriously, and it's an extensive process. I would say that this is now on track, Peter, to be the largest airlift in U.S. history. And that is bringing American citizens out. It is bringing our Afghan partners out. It is bringing allies out. So no, I would not say that is.
That's all they cared about. They wanted to be able to have a talking point. Yep. The largest airlift in American history. Yep. It's a huge success. No one's ever done this before.
Shove them in.
Get as many people as possible. We don't care about the vetting. That was actually framed after a question that they caught one of them that had ISIS ties. Clearly one of them slipped through, at least, who had ISIS ties. And by the way, I said he entered the country on September 9th. This was Donald Trump in an interview on September 8th.
The country has never been more unsafe. We have people pouring in through our southern border, which everyone's forgetting about right now because of the travesty of Afghanistan. And if you look at the people coming in by the hundreds, by the thousands, and these are not the people necessarily that wanted the protection.
Right.
These are people. Right. So are they terrorists? How many terrorists are coming in? And
that was Donald Trump on September 8th. On September 9th, this guy got in, and now he's been arrested for planning a massacre of American citizens on Election Day. All right, coming up later in the program, we're going to speak with Jerry Dunleavy. Jerry Dunleavy at 7:35. He is a journalist, author of Kabul, where he documented the details of that disaster in Afghanistan. And they talked about this in the book, about the unvetting, the lack of vetting, and the fact that everyone knew at the time in our military and in our State Department, everyone knew that terrorists were getting in, and they didn't care. It's 5:43. If you're wondering whether Glenn Youngkin and Attorney General Jason Miyares of Virginia are doing a good job in election integrity and cleaning up the voter rolls, making sure that only legal voters are able to vote, well, all you have to do is look at the news that they are being sued by the League of Women Voters and a coalition of immigrant rights groups to know that obviously Youngkin and Miyares are well over the target here.
Yes.
They are suing the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Governor Glenn Youngkin for purging voter rolls that will disenfranchise legitimate voters, they say.
Sure.
This was filed Monday in a U.S. District Court in Alexandria. It says the executive order issued in August requiring daily updates to voter lists to remove ineligible voters violates a federal law. But actually, the violation of the federal law is non-eligible voters being on the voter rolls.
Yeah,
it also, by the way, violates Virginia law. If a non-citizen or an ineligible voter is registered to vote, that's a violation of Virginia law, and that needs to be remedied. And so they're trying to sue because Youngkin and Miyares, for the first time in recent memory, is actually following the law in doing their jobs.
Look, go ahead.
Well, here's what they're claiming. They're claiming that, sure, when somebody registered to vote, they weren't a citizen. But between their registration date and now, they've become a citizen, and now you're purging them off the voter rolls, and that's disenfranchising them. And I have two responses to that. Number one, you're admitting that they broke the law when they registered when they weren't supposed to register as a non-citizen in the first place. And for those very few instances where someone actually is a citizen now, and they've been purged from the voter rolls, well, Virginia has a stopgap for that. You show up to vote, they say you're not on the voting list anymore, and you can still put in a provisional ballot when you show your valid ID that shows that you are now a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
So they're going to be taken care of. This entire thing is an attack on the rule of law and on Youngkin's efforts to actually get voter integrity.
It's more than that, Larry. I appreciate you explaining all that, and that is great. Let's be clear. The League of Women Voters is a tool of the left now. They are 100%. One of these institutions that has been captured by the left. All of their hierarchy, the higher parts of their hierarchy, it's entirely leftist women. They are an adjunct of the Democrat Party now, just like the teachers' unions, for gosh sakes, how long do we have in this segment? I mean, even the Smithsonian museums are now run by leftist.
The ACLU?
Leftist activists.
100%.
So when you approach a story and it says, the League of Women Voters, right? This very, respected organization that's really supposed to focus on voter registration and getting people to the polls. No. They're not about that anymore. And just like the PTA, it's not the parent-teacher organization. It's the teachers' union organization, okay, or association. Every institution, every major institution in this country has been captured by the left. It has been a slow process, but the left is very smart and very patient. And over the last 50 years, they have gotten themselves embedded into these organizations to change the culture of this country. And this is just another example of that.
Yeah, and then there's also, of course, the media doing their bit as well in this. You'll hear news organizations who are reporting this story, and they'll have quotes from the League of Women Voters. They'll have quotes from so-called immigrant rights groups. But an immigrant does not have the right to vote in this country if they're not a citizen. Think about that for a minute. So when you're a citizen, you're no longer an immigrant. You're a citizen, right? So if you're in immigrants' rights groups, you're representing people who are not citizens. And so who exactly you're in an immigrants' rights group is trying to protect the rights of immigrants when it comes to voting when immigrants don't have the right to vote. And they're suing, right? But you'll get quotes from them. You'll get quotes from League of Women Voters, but it's scarce. I found Fox 5, who wrote this up. They had a quote from a Youngkin spokesperson. That's the only one I've seen so far.
Typical.
The other news organizations who are covering this only have quotes from the leftist groups.
Again, Larry, another institution. The media is another institution that is captured. Thank God for us, for this station, for our shows,
right,
and for the Free Beacon and the Federalist and other news that are really breaking that mold.
But here's what's amazing about that and about the media's role in this. Glenn Youngkin and Jason Miyares, this began in August. We had him on to talk about it. They found 80,000 people who were registered to vote in Virginia who shouldn't have been registered. They were ineligible for various reasons, many of those reasons were because they lacked U.S. citizenship, and they got purged. The media reported that, and that was it. Dead silence, nothing until this lawsuit. And now they're saying, they're being sued because they're racist and discriminatory.
Yes.
Missing in there was any kind of journalistic curiosity endeavor to find out, wait a minute, who are these people? How did they get registered? Did they vote in the last elections?
Doesn't matter.
Why did it take years for them to get purged? Who was in charge of this before this purge? We had ineligible voters, 80,000 of which were on the voter rolls. They probably voted. They probably affected elections, and no one in the media asked a single question about it. Didn't do any investigations, didn't do any follow-up on it, but now it's a story because left-wing groups are suing Glenn Youngkin. This is why you come here for your news. This is why you come to WMAL for your news and analysis and context and perspective, and we appreciate it. It's 5:53.